Hi, welcome to our next segment in 20th century art movements. We're going to be looking at a movement in art called happenings. It's sort of like performance art. So again, this is something pretty new in terms of territory for us in experimentation with art. So one of the themes I want you to think about is when art intersects with life. Many people associate performance art with highly publicized controversies over government funding of the arts, censorship, and standards of public decency. Indeed, at its worst, performance art can seem gratuitous, boring, or just plain weird, but at its best, it taps into our most basic shared instincts, our physical and psychological need for food, shelter, sex, and human interaction, our individual fears and self-consciousness, our concerns about life, the future, and the world we live in. It often forces us to think about issues in a way that can be disturbing and uncomfortable, but it can also make us laugh by calling attention to the absurdities in life and the idiosyncrasies of human behavior. Performance art differs from traditional theater in its rejection of a clear narrative, use of random or chance-based structures, and direct appeal to the audience. The art historian Rosalie Goldberg writes, "Historically, performance art has been a medium that challenges and violates borders between discipline and genders, between private and public, and between everyday life and art that follows no rules. Although the term encompasses a broad range of artistic practices that involve bodily experiences in live action, its radical connotations derive from this challenge to conventional social morals and artistic values of the past. Viewers play a vital role in the creation. What you're looking at is Measuring the Universe in 2000, that was done in 2007 by Roman Ondak. And he's a Sylvanian artist. And over the course of the exhibition, attendants mark museums' visitors' heights, first name and dates of the measurements on the gallery walls. Beginning as an empty white space, over time the gallery gradually accumulated the traces of thousands of people. The inclusion of viewers in the process of art making has a long tradition in the history of performance-based art. By inviting people to actively participate, artists attempt to overcome traditional diversions between art objects and spectators, and production and reception. Measuring the Universe, which is the performance installation you're looking at, turns the domestic custom of recording children's height on door frames into a public event, referring through its title to humankind's age-old desire to gauge the scale of the world. The process creates a work of art with a multitude of participants, merging art with everyday life in a confluence that is at the very center of Ondak's artistic practice. Some artists, inspired largely by abstract expressionism, use performance to emphasize the body's role in artistic production. Working before a live audience, Kazugo Sharaga of the Japanese Guta group made sculpture by crawling through piles of mud. George Matthew staged similar performances in Paris, where he violently threw paint at his canvas. These performative approaches to making art built on philosophical interpretations of abstract expressionism, which held the gestural makings of action painters as visible evidence of the artist's own existence. Bolstered by Hans Newmuth photographs of Jackson Pollock in his studio, moving dance-like around the canvas on the floor, artists like Shigara and Matthew began to see the artist's creative act as equally important, if not more so than the artwork produced. In this light, Pollock's distinctive drips, spills, and splatters appeared as a mere remnant, a visible trace left over from the monument of creation. Shifting attention from the art object to the artist's action further suggests that art existed in a real space and time. In New York's Visual artists combine their interest in action painting with ideas of the avant-garde composer John Cage to blur the line between art and life. Cage employed chance procedures to creating musical compositions, such as his 433 in his infamous piece. Cage used the time frame specified in the title to bracket ambient noises that occurred randomly during the performance by effectively calling attention to the hum of fluorescent lights, people moving in their seats, coughs, whispers, and other ordinary sounds. Cage transformed them into a unique musical composition. So what you see here is that, the artist is really sort of trying to move attention away from the object, or, sort of orientation of how we look at art, that's the final product, the painting, the sculpture. And here, talking about the process that the artist is going through, and that in turn is just as important as the work itself, and sometimes even more important. Another theme, the private made political. Drawing on these influences, new artistic formats emerged in the late 1950s. Environments and happenings physically place viewers in commonplace surroundings, often forcing them to participate in a series of loosely structured actions. Fluxus artists, poets, and musicians likewise challenged viewers by presenting the most mundane events, brushing teeth, making a salad, exiting the theater, as a form of art. A well-known example is the bed-in that the Fluxus artist Yoko Ono staged in 1969 in Amsterdam with her husband John Lennon. Typical of most performance art, Ono and Lennon made ordinary human activity a public spectacle, which demanded personal interaction and raised popular awareness of their pacifist beliefs. In the politicized environment of the 1960s, many artists employed performance to addressing emerging social concerns. For feminist artists in particular, using their body in live performances proved effective in challenging historical representations of women, made mostly by male artists for male patrons. In keeping with past tradition, artists such as Carolee Sheeman and Hannah Wilk, Valerie Export displayed their nude bodies for the viewer's gaze, but they resisted the idealization of women as passive objects of beauty and desire. Through their words and actions, they confronted their audience and raised issues about the relationship of female experience to cultural beliefs and institutions, physical appearance and bodily function, including menstruation and childbearing. Their groundbreaking work paved the way for male and female artists in the 1980s and 1990s, who similarly used body and performance art to explore issues of gender, race, and sexual identity. Throughout the mid-20th century, performance has been closely tied to search for alternatives to established art forms, which many artists felt had become fetishized as objects of economic and cultural value. Because performance art emphasized the artist's action and the viewer's experience in real space and time, it rarely yielded a final object to be sold, collected, or exhibited. Artists of the 1960s and 70s also experimented with other dematerialized formats, including earthworks and conceptual art, that resisted commodification and traditional modes of museum display. The simultaneous rise of photography and video, however, offered artists a visible way to document and widely distribute this new work. Performance art's acceptance into the mainstream over the past 30 years has led to new trends in its practice and understanding. Ironically, the need to position performance within art history has led museums and scholars to focus heavily on photographs and videos that were intended only as documents of live events. In this context, such archival materials assume the art status of the original performance. This practice runs counter to the goal of many artists whose first turned to performance as an alternative to object-based forms of art. Alternatively, some artists and institutions now reenact or stage reenactments of earlier performances in order to recapture the experience of a live event. In a 2010 retrospective exhibition at New York's Museum of Modern Art, for example, performers in the gallery staged live reenactments of work works by pioneering performance artist Maria Abramovich, alongside photographs and video documentation of the original performances. Now, she is one of my favorite artists. She's truly amazing. One of the pieces that you see with her depicted in the red dress is called The Artist is Present, and it is part of a retrospective of the performance work of that she had at the MoMA by the same name. This was a new piece, and upwards of 1 million people have seen the show, while over 1,500 sat in front of the artist. She puts herself through tremendous physical abuse merely by sitting for so long. This is in line with her entire body of work. Her performances are all about pushing the body and mind to the past, to and past the limits of endurance, and in so doing, allow artists and audiences to find some form of transcendence. It directly challenges viewers and is incredibly visceral, dealing with extremes of physical experiences, especially pain. She wants no meditation between herself and the audience, and many of her works involve participation from them. So with this particular one, which was really recent, and HBO did a documentary about it. It's really amazing. I might show it after the exam. But she would sit basically in the gallery, and these people, is amazing, lined up, and they would just sit and look at each other. And I mean, it really was quite powerful. So she really is amazing. Examples of some of her famous performance pieces include two naked people, a man and a woman, herself and her lover and partner, Yule, in the original performance, standing at the narrow entrance of an art gallery and therefore necessitating gallery goers to squeeze in between the two naked bodies. So this is a photograph of that performance, facing either the man or the woman. In another performance, Rhythm Zero, in 1974, she set up a scenario where she stood with a bunch of objects in front of her and allowed anyone to use the objects on her in whatever way they wished without her interfering. One patron had to be stopped from killing her with a loaded revolver that was on the object of was one of the objects on the table. And so this is a photograph from that performance. So pretty deep and very thought-provoking stuff. I love her, and if again, I think I am going to show that documentary. It's amazing. So this is a performance installation that we're going to be focusing on called Narcissus Garden. This is actually in the AP 250 works. Today there are a few female artists who are more visible to a wide range of international audiences than Yayoi Kusama, who was born in 1929 in Japan. Kusama is a self-taught artist who now chooses to live in a private Tokyo mental health facility while prolifically producing art in various media in her studio nearby. Her highly constructed persona and self-proclaimed lifelong history of insanity have been the subject of scrutiny and critiques for decades. Art historian Jody Cutler places Kusama's oeuvre, or her body of work, in dialogue with the psychological state known as narcissism, as narcissism is both the subject and the cause of Kusama's art, or in other words, a conscious artistic element related to content. It is within this content that we examine Kusama and her infamous Narcissus Garden. Narcissism is in part the egotistical admiration of oneself. Kusama arrived in New York City from Japan in 1958 and immediately approached dealers and artists alike to promote her work. Within the first few years, she began to exhibit and associate herself with seminal artists and critics such as Donald Judd, Joseph Cornwell, Yves Klein, and Lucio Fontana, who later were very instrumental in her realizing Narcissus' Garden. In 1965, she mounted her first mirror installation, Infinity Mirror Room, Falls Fields, at Calistine Gallery in New York. A mirrored room without a ceiling was filled with colorfully dotted phallus-like stuffed objects on the floor. The repeated reflection in the mirrors convey the illusion of a continuous sea of multiplied phalli expanding into infinity. This playful and erotic exhibition immediately attracted the media's attention. The pinnacle of her success culminated in the 33rd Venice Biennial in 1966, although Kusama was not officially invited to exhibit, according to her biography. She received the moral and financial support from Lucio Fontana and permission from the chairman of the biennial committee to stage 1,500 mass-produced plastic silver globes on the lawn outside the Italian pavilion. The tightly arranged 1,500 shimmering balls constructed an infinite reflective field in which the images of the artist, the visitors, the architecture, and the landscape were repeated, distorted, and projected by the convex mirror surfaces that produced virtual images appearing closer and smaller than reality. The size of each sphere was similar to that of a fortune-teller's crystal ball. When gazing into it, the viewer only saw his or her own reflection staring back, forcing a confrontation with one's own vanity and ego. During the opening week, Kusama placed 2 signs at the installation, Narcissus Garden, Kusama, and Your Narcissum for sale on the lawn. Acting like a street peddler, she was selling the mirror balls to passers for $2 each, while distributing flyers with Herbert Reed's complimentary remarks about her work on them. She consciously drew attention to the otherness of her exotic heritage by wearing a gold kimono with a silver sash. The monetary exchange between Kusama and her customers underscored the economic system embedded in art production, exhibition, and circulation. The biennial officials eventually stepped in and put an end to her peddling, but the installation remained. Her interactive performance and eye-catching installation garnered international press coverage. The original installation of Narcissus Garden from 1966 has been frequently interpreted by many as both Kusama's self-promotion and her protest of the commercialization of art. Since then, Kusama's oeuvre has been integrated into the canon of art history and popular with art institutions around the world. In 1993, Kusama was officially invited to represent Japan at the 45th Venice Biennial. Her Narcissus Garden continues to live on. It has been commissioned and reinstalled at various settings, including the Brazilian business tycoon Bernardo de Melo Paz's institution in Houghton Central Park in New York City, as well as retail booths and art fairs. The recreation of Narcissus Garden has erased the notion of political cynicism and social critique. Instead, those shiny balls are now made of stainless steel and carrying hefty price tags have become a trophy of prestige and self-importance. Originally intended as the media for an interactive performance between the artist and the viewer, the objects are now regarded as valuable commodities for display. The profound narcissistic undertones, however, have been ironically amplified not only by the artist's pervasive ostentation, but also by the viewership in the age of the internet. Seduced by his or her own reflective image on the convex surfaces, viewers snap photographs with a smartphone and instantly upload them to social media for the rest of the world to see. The urge to capture and disseminate the moment one's own image coalesces onto a privileged object and a privileged institution seems to motivate the obsession with the self. To further accentuate the effect of gazing at one's multiple selves, many installations now take place on the water, where the original Narcissus from Greek mythology fell in love with his own reflection and eventually drowned. Right, so our next and sort of final movement in 20th century art is referred to as side art, sometimes called earth art. Side art is dependent on its location to render full meaning. Other works of side art are temporary, while other times the work remains but needs the original environment intact in order for it to be fully understood. Such items, again, are often called earthworks, and site art really started happening in the 1970s and is still being developed and very popular today. So what you're looking at is Robert Smithson's spiral jetty. The monumental earthwork spiral jetty, done in 1970, was created by Smithson and is located off Rosal Point in the north arm of the Great Salt Lake. Made of black basalt rocks and earth gathered from the spiral jetty is about a 15-foot wide coil that stretches more than 1,500 feet into the lake. Undoubtedly the most famous large-scale earthwork of the period, and it has come to epitomize land art. Its exceptional art historical importance and its uniquely beauty have drawn visitors and media attention from throughout Utah and around the world. Rosal Point attracted Smithson for a number of reasons, including its remote location and the reddish quality of the water in that section of the lake, and effect of the algae. Using natural materials from the site, Smithson designed spiral jetty to extend into the lake several inches above the waterline. However, the earthwork is affected by seasonal fluctuations in the fluctuations in the lake level, which can alternately submerge the jetty or leave it completely exposed and covered in salt crystals. The close communion between spiral jetty and the supersaling Great Salt Lake emphasizes the entropic processes of erosion and physical disorder with which Smithson was continually fascinated. Smithson was very attracted to Rosal Point because of the blood red color of the water and its connection with this idea of the primordial sea. The red hue of the water is due to the presence of a salt-tolerant bacteria and algae that thrives in the extreme 27% salinity of the lake's north arm, which was isolated from freshwater sources by the building of a causeway by the South Pacific Railroad in 1959. He was reportedly attracted to Rosal Point as well because of the stark anti-pastoral beauty and industrial remnants from the nearby Golden Spike National Historic Site, as well as an old pier and a few unused oil rigs. While observing the construction of the piece from a helicopter, Smithson reportedly remarked, "It in Utah ego as a counterpoint in the pastoral Baroque painting Et in Arcadia ego by Nicholas Poussin." To move the rock into the lake, Smithson hired Bob Phillips of Parsons Construction of nearby Odin, Utah, who used 2 dump trucks, a large tractor, and a front-end loader to haul the 6,650 tons of rock and earth into the lake. It is reported that Smithson had difficulty convincing a contractor to accept the unusual proposal. Spiral Jetty was the first of his pieces to require the acquisition of land rights and earth-moving equipment. He began working on the jetty in April 1970. Construction took about 6 days. The sculpture sometimes becomes submerged whenever the level of the Great Lake rises above an elevation of 4,195 feet. At the time of Spiral Jetty's construction, the water level of the lake was unusually low due to drought. Within a few years, the water level returned to a normal level, submerging the jetty for the next 3 decades. In 2002, the area experienced another drought, lowering the water level in the lake and revealing the jetty for a second time. The jetty remained completely exposed for almost a year. During the spring of 2005, the lake level rose again due to a near-record setting snowpack in the surrounding mountains, partially submerging the sculpture. In spring 2010, lake levels receded and the sculpture was again walkable and visible. As of late June 2011, runoff from a record snowpack has again completely submerged the jetty. Current conditions fluctuate, but as of October 2015, the jetty is above water and visible. The sculpture was financed in part by a $9,000 USD grant from the Virginia Dawn Gallery of New York, and a 20-year lease for the site was granted for $100 annually. Smithison died in a helicopter crash in Texas 3 years after finishing the jetty. The sculpture has been owned by the state of Utah since June 2011. Previously, the area was leased by the DIA Art Foundation of New York, who acquired the piece by a donation from Smithson's estate in 1999. The DIA Foundation is currently seeking a new lease from the state. So one of the things that occurs upon walking on the jetty when it is exposed is experiencing the twisting and curling path. And it changes the participant's view from every angle. So that's something, compositional that you should think about. And a jetty, just so you understand, is supposed to be a pier in the water. Here it is transformed into a curl of rock sitting slightly in a vast empty wilderness. And then coil, the sort of coil form should be recognizable. It is an image seen in North American earthworks. Hopefully Serpent Mound from Ohio, which we looked at when we looked at the Indigenous Americas section, will come to mind. So I wanted to show you the work of one of my favorite artists named Andy Goldsworthy. He still works today. And he's is a British artist known for his site-specific installations involving natural materials, considered part of the environmental art movement alongside other artists. Goldsworthy's work is inspired by Robert Smithson and other land artists from the 1960s and 70s. As a sculptor and photographer, Goldsworthy crafts his installations out of rocks, ice, or branches, cognizant that the landscape can and will change, carefully documenting the resulting interventions and exhibiting them through his photographic prints. So these are some images that he's photographed. He does these really beautiful arrangement with leaves and flowers. He's been quoted as saying, ephemeral works are not constructed with longevity in mind. It's not about art, he explained. It's just about life and the need to understand that a lot of things in life do not last. The artist currently lives and works in Scotland. And so again, here's a picture of him sort of putting together one of his installations. Again, his art process usually entails him, using brightly colored flowers, icicles, leaves, mud, pine cones, snow, stone, twigs, and thorns. He has been quoted as saying, "I think it's incredibly brave to be working with flowers and leaves and petals, but I have to. I can't edit the materials I work with. My remit is to work with nature as a whole." Goldsworthy is generally considered the founder of modern rock balancing. For his ephemeral works, Goldsworthy often uses only his bare hands, teeth, and found tools to prepare the arranged materials. Here's some other works of his. And again, it really is important to think of the role of photography and how it's crucial in really sort of documenting something that is ephemeral and transient. According to Goldsworthy, each work grows, stays, decays, integral parts of the cycle which the photograph shows at its height, marking the movement when the work is most alive. There is an intensity about a work at its peak that I hope is expressed in the image. Process and decay are implicit. Here's some other ones. So there's a ton of his stuff on the internet, and I thought you guys would enjoy his work, and he's, more of a contemporary artist. So this concludes our segment on other 20th century movements. We still have a lot to cover, unfortunately. We will be looking at contemporary art, which are sort of living artists today. We'll also be looking at African art. We'll be looking at Asian and South East Asian art as well, so stay tuned.